Up next, we have Carol Bogezi. So we wanted to bring in all different kinds of viewpoints and expertise today. And Carol is actually a wildlife science researcher. She has a very long bio, so Carol, I'm just going to skim if you don't mind. Carol has a PhD, she's a PhD candidate, in the wildlife science program in the School of Environment and Forest Sciences at the University of Washington in Seattle. She came all the way down from Seattle. She's an international student from Uganda, awarded the prestigious Beneki Africa Wildlife Conservation Scholarship by the Wildlife Conservation Society. So I had to read that to get it right. So she has pursued her graduate studies in the US, additional support from SEFS and Wildlife Conservation Network. In 2016, Ms. Bogezi was awarded the 10th Annual Environmental Leadership Award by the Bullitt Foundation and was named one of the top 40 women under 40 by the Sunday Monitor in Uganda. So, very smart woman. She's intimately aware of the needs of humans and wildlife competing for natural resources. Her research focuses on understanding interactions between humans and carnivores in the state of Washington. She aims to contribute to improved carnivore existence through analyzing how carnivore movement behaviors influence human-wildlife interactions, and by assessing social dimensions of human-carnivore coexistence strategies, especially in the urbanizing landscapes. Bogezi believes that the experience and skills that she's acquiring during her study in the U.S. will enable her to increase her effectiveness of wildlife conservation in Uganda and globally. Yes, very good. So we're just honored to have her here with us today to talk about some of these issues and as they relate to coexistence. So welcome, Carol.
Thank you so much, everyone. Can you see this one for the pointer? So I prepared this presentation, but I think I'll kind of go through some slides. I won't have to stop every slide. I'm still a student. I'm writing my dissertation, so sometimes we're not as good at communicating in a story like Kevin and Joe just did, and then we have all these boring slides. But I'll try to make it more interesting. My study here is interactions between people and carnivores in Washington State. That's where I'm studying. I'll typically start with just a little background about maybe Uganda and why I ended up studying this, and then structure into the topic that we shall discuss today, which will be one of my interviews that I carried out with ranchers. So Uganda is in Africa, in East Africa. It's a landlocked country the size of Oregon, with a population of California, so about 40 million people in Oregon. And we get a lot of water, as you can see, so not a lot of land will be occupied. And we also, the green blobs are national parks, and then the water. So it's pretty dense, and so you get in interactions with people, with wildlife. I grew up, when you fly to Uganda, because you fly into Entebbe, and Kampala is the capital. And I grew up on Entebbe Road somewhere around here, though my parents came from the west, but that's where I was born and raised. And our farm was somewhere towards the west, but not far away. So we did get in interaction with people. My father, when Kevin was talking about his love for the land, made me think about my own dad, who had a hardware shop, but also had a farm, and during the school holidays we worked there, and partly that's where I first got into interaction with both carnivores, but also the care for the wildlife. We had to do our chores, and I would sit on the farm at a place where I enjoyed to just watch small antelopes go by, and at night sometimes we would have to hear whistles and come out to chase the mongoose away from the crops, and sometimes they would have to get killed with a bow and arrow. We can't really have guns if we are not in the army in Uganda. So that I was always like, oh, why do we kill them? They're so cute. Because I liked to see them, but also I was just one of the children. So to my parents, it was more like, you don't even know where your tuition fee is going to come from. We can't let them be here. So it was always that fine balance is can we have the wildlife and can we have the farms, right, as well? So that kind of grew with me, and in school I ended up also being in the wildlife club. Some of my colleagues, when I tell them what I do, high school friends, they say, "You still do that?" And I'm like, "We thought that was just for the clubs." And I was like, "Yeah, I still do that. I do it for a living." So yeah, and then here I am. So some nature of interactions beside, like I've just talked about, say having vervet monkeys eat your crops. They will ruin them. Now if you live even further, you have elephants. Those will completely annihilate your, cabbage patch. But then also we get like vectors like diseases, but we also get food. So as humans and wildlife, as humans we get to interact a lot with wildlife at different taxa levels. Because of that close proximity, and then they just don't stay in the protected areas, especially when you're 40 million people in the size of Oregon. And then also wildlife don't know any natural boundaries, so we just kind of get to be closer to them. When I'm talking about my research, sometimes depending on the audience, I gotta remind, it's like, but why does wildlife matter? I think everybody knows trees are good, water is good, we breathe the oxygen, takes carbon out of the space, but wildlife matter too. We do get food, fiber, and genetic diversity, dogs and wolves, like how we are here for the Wolf Week. And most of the forests also depend on wildlife to be disperse their seeds, and some of them have to go through the digestive tracts to grow. So in order to have healthy forests, we also need to have wildlife, or we'll have what we call the empty forest syndrome, where the forest is literally dying because there is no wildlife. Carnivores like wolves are good at also structuring the natural landscape through the trophic cascades. Feed on the ungulates, and then there is more vegetation growing and that sort of thing, and then we get a healthy ecosystem. And then finally, for humans, it's really good psychological health. Like, many people have dogs and it's like just happy. So it's the same with wildlife. Knowing it's there gives us a psychological development. I think I'm preaching to the choir here. I just have to go through this. So given my background, when I came to study, am I going to study wildlife, or am I going to study people? And I want to study wildlife, but I really care for people. So it meant that I couldn't just study one or the other. And I'm like, yeah, I'll study them in an interdisciplinary approach where I'll have, I have the wildlife, I'm studying the carnivores, but then I study them on the landscape because they don't live in zoos or cages. They live out in the space, sharing space with ranchers, sharing space with hikers and the people who are there. And then the people, of course, the human dimensions. So my dissertation has the three components, because I know they're together. We just can't have one more without the other. And today I'll focus on the human dimensions part of it, talking about people and wolves in Washington State. My chapter today will just be talking about my interviews with the ranchers, participating in mitigation coexistence with wolves. What is the rancher's perspective? So wolves returned to Washington State. I think the first pack was recorded around 2008, and when they returned, they also started in these areas, the east, maybe both from BC, Joe, and then from Idaho as well. And the orange colors are also the livestock areas. The ones on this side are mostly dairy, but this way is for beef, cow-calf pairs. So the wolves just went right where the ranchers also were, because that's where the landscape was suitable for them. And when when the wolves came back, when I came in to do my research, I thought, oh, that's a novel idea, and there is people who are studying about the wolves, trying to find out their recovery and seeing they're growing 30% a year and they're having a good success story. Of course, there is a lot of animal science studies also studying the livestock. And so when I was asked, when I read the whole what's going on, I thought, wait, how about asking about, the ranchers and then the wolves? It also kind of made me feel like this would be questions I asked my dad if he were there, so I would kind of get to find out a little more about that. So I learned that, unlike in Uganda, in Washington, there is money for wolf conservation for the rancher as well. Like if they would participate in some program, there is what they call a damage prevention cooperation agreement, where the rancher could sign with the Department of Fish and Wildlife so that they can receive technical and some financial support. We don't have that in Uganda. We don't even have compensation. So I thought, well, I want to find out what they think about that. So then that led to the background where I was doing my interviews at that time in 2015, and there was about 300,000, which was to be given to be used by the department to work with ranchers to get different strategies done on their ranches by signing up. They could also share with them some information from the collared cougar wolves. Sorry, my other chapter is cougars, and I was talking about cougars yesterday. And today I'm talking about wolves. So they have collared wolves, and ranchers who would sign up would also be given some information about where the collared wolves were in relation to their ranch, so that they can, maybe ride there and make sure their animals were safe. But at that time, they were not signing up, and those about 37, we have about 5,000 ranchers or plus, but about 5,000 in Washington, and at that time there was only 37 who had signed up for the damage prevention cooperative agreement, and just 2 collaborative range rider programs to go check on that. And so I thought, why is participation low when there is funds and there is people and there is capacity for people to go there and help, and then there is also economic loss because the wolves are there and the livestock get eaten. We see it in the press. So that's why I went there, because there was a gap between what resources were there for mitigation and what the participation was. So my main objectives were to really speak with the ranchers, find out what they were doing, and then find out also what more they would be doing. No, that's going the wrong direction. Just the factors that influence their participation in these programs to coexist, not using lethal measures. So, what's that? I interviewed the ranchers. I did not use a survey. I just had a list from the Washington Cattlemen's Association, called their president. Then he gave me some names, and I would call them and try to ask if I can talk with them, and arrange, when they said yes, a place according to their convenience. Ranchers are busy, they work all the time, and a lot of them take second jobs, so they would have to say, all right, you have to come down to, Kettle Falls or someplace, and I'll talk to you on Saturday afternoon, that's when I'm free. So I did go to these, and then I would ask the rancher the next person to talk to. And our interviews were really open-ended, mostly just hearing from the rancher, what do you think about wolves? And what are you doing? Would you do more with, with what if the wolves came onto your ranch? The interviews would be 2 hours, maybe the shortest was about 30 minutes. And then I went back to school, and I was just listening and interviewing, and just not interviewing, writing out, transcribing all the interviews I had. And then I just used, they call it grounded theory. I had to learn it as well, because my background was mostly in the natural sciences. I had to learn using the sociology methods to see from all this information, from the rancher's own words, what things can we get out of here to learn more about what coexistence would mean for the ranchers, instead of us taking them measures that we've, developed in our surveys. So that was grounded theory. And so, very quickly from my results, I got, even after so many phone calls, I got 45 ranchers who were willing to talk, and many ranchers were busy. They didn't want to talk to, oh, you're from Seattle, you're from University of Washington. We don't like those guys. They're probably wearing Birkenstocks. So a lot of them just turned me down immediately. But those who said yes, they were very informative. They were very willing to talk, and I really appreciated that. Most of them were from the east, and ranchers did have like a wide range of attitudes towards wolves. Sometimes when you just sit back and you're thinking, oh, ranchers and wolves, they just hate the wolves, they just want to shoot every wolf. But when you're speaking to an array of them, some will be like, well, I'm definitely here to raise my livestock, so I don't like wolves, but I also know that wolves are important for nature. So they did know the things that we think, oh, it's environmentalists who know them. And then some said, yeah, I do love wolves, I just don't want them in my corral. And there were others who said, there is a reason why wolves were shot, they should all be gone. So there was a whole array of, of attitudes, and that's important to know, that ranchers are not just the other side, on the evil side of people. So when I asked about mitigation, the question was, so what are you doing about wolves known to eat your livestock? Many ranchers didn't have wolves on their ranch yet. So they would say, well, I don't know, because I don't have wolves. Then I say, well, how about the other predators? You probably have coyotes and cougars and stuff. And so some of these mitigations are what they use to better coexist with carnivores in general, large carnivores. And while they are not all like physical things that they do, the question was very open. It's like, so when you get wolves, what do you do? And it's like, yeah, I'll call the Department of Fish and Wildlife. Or I use dogs and guard animals. I have, my latest write-up doesn't even have ranch riders, because ranchers have cowboys and ranch hands and cowgirls. And they thought the range rider term was something that people from the environmental side were planting on them. So they have cowboys and cowgirls and ranch hands. And then some of them rotate their pasture accordingly. They're like, well, I just move my animals around, and so I know where they are, and that way I know that they're not getting eaten. And so it doesn't seem to, originally before I found out, it doesn't seem like that's something that they're using to prevent depredations, but they do it, and it makes sure that their animals are not eaten. So it's a mitigation strategy already existing. And then some ranchers said, well, we do get compensation, so we raise our animals as normal and count our animals which are back. We engage the department, and they gotta pay for what has been lost to wolves. Washington has a very generous compensation program. I think it's twice for a confirmed depredation, and I think last year or the year before it's been raised to like 50% for a probable one. So it's a pretty generous one, although many ranchers do not like compensation, as we'll go through them. So the next few slides, I would ask, well, we just don't agree with the ideas from Olympia. They just felt that the decision makers were so far away distance-wise for them to have the same interests as the ranchers, and so they just didn't want to involve them given that distant disconnect and the lack of trust for the government programs. Guard animals like dogs, almost every ranch I know has dogs, like big dogs that guard their place. But some dogs get into issues with wolves, especially during springtime when it's breeding season. So some ranchers did have like some issues with those. But those who did not have dogs specifically for wolves, or you can also have dogs which are much bigger and tougher that can help you against large carnivores like wolves, and they can put on a good fight. They said, well, if you're going to buy that dog, that costs money. It's not like get that dog and the dog roams around. You invest in it and train it and feed it. And then also because they already have their dogs, ranchers don't want you to come from elsewhere and tell them, hey, you got a dog, but that dog is not good enough. I'm going to tell you what to do. They just felt like it just doesn't work being told what to do on their ranches. Oh yeah, it came up. Range riders. So the range rider program was one of those in the damage prevention cooperative agreement, where range riders are cowboys, but then they have access to the GPS data from the collared wolves. So they will be able to ride where the wolves are and make sure that the livestock is not there. And so they kind of are like GPS guided cowboys. So the ranchers are like, we do have cowboys and don't really like the term. If the range rider were one of the ranch hands already then ranchers would prefer them. But if you're going to go to the nearby town in Seklelem and get someone who loves wolves, loves riding horses, and knows how to follow the GPS to come on their ranch, they're like, I don't want to have strangers on my land. It was something that made it a barrier to use range riders. And then wolves usually will come to your livestock at night, and riders are not there at night. And so it's like, this sounds really good, and maybe it will work to prevent, these conflicts during the day, but how about at night? Husbandry practices. I think this is this is not my picture, but I have a picture with flaggery, the fence, the electric fence. But it was one of the things where ranchers say they do not have time to set up new measures completely. We had from two ranchers before, it's a full-time job, at night as well. And so usually they won't have time to go learning new skills or implementing things that require extra time to learn. Many have their lifestyle where you go check on your animals maybe every 2 days or every other day, or maybe you rotate them, but you're not going to have flags flying around your 100 acres of land. It's both cumbersome, time wasting, and it's not your lifestyle, so it's not comfortable for them to do. Similar to, it's not part of their identity. And also part of this was also some ranchers who were willing, did not want to be the only ones doing that when their neighbors did not do it, because it meant their neighbors would think they're sellout. And so it's like, no, I'm not going to do that stuff which is making me look different from my friends, and no one will talk to me. And when you live in the country, your neighbor is far away. So if your neighbor who is 10 miles away won't talk to you, then the next person to talk to you is so far away. So it matters to keep these social connections intact. And if it means not participating in some of these mitigations to keep your friends, then you will not participate. Finally, the compensation program. There is the regulatory burden, filling paperwork, and then before they increase the compensation was also insufficient in terms of money. It's still, ranchers still feel that when they've raised their animal and invested all this time, being given money for the animal doesn't account for all the genetic work and all the time they've invested in their animal. So those were the barriers. There's some motivations why they participated. So there were some motivations too. The ranchers who said, well, we do these things, why do they do them? A lot of moral implications. Many ranchers said, wolves are part of nature. They were here, I know that my great-grandfather shot them. Shoot a wolf or you're doing the wrong thing, like Joe said. So they felt like it's up to us as the humans to really reverse this trend. And so there was a lot of just moral feelings that we should have wolves, and so they will do something about it to have them back on the land. They acknowledge the value of wolves in nature. If you're having all these, like in Mount St. Helens area, they have all these ungulates which are unhealthy and sick, and they're like, if wolves would go there, they would thin those out and help that population get healthier. Also then, finally, the mitigations that ranchers would have preferred to participate in, they would have to be very familiar, like a cowboy. So if somebody came in and is like, well, rancher, which mitigations should we improve upon? It would be better for them to augment on the ones that they're already using than having to start a whole new one, which would take more time for them to learn, and they're not familiar with it. So that helped. So then, for the question of, well, what can be done? What ideas do you have to enhance these programs to improve what's existing? So because compensation is one of the most common thing of when you lose your animals and call the department, they will pay you for that animal. The ranchers wish that if they would improve and streamline the compensation program so that it doesn't take too long, that the wolves were here, it shouldn't go through too much paperwork to prove that the wolves indeed ate my animals. They would feel better about it instead of waiting a long time and feeling like they're being doubted for their animal which they've lost. Many ranchers work with the agriculture department already. I'm going to this point, for soil conservation and others, and for working with the Department of Fish and Wildlife is new, so a lot of ranchers felt like, well, we already work with some agencies. If those agencies would be the ones to work with the Department of Fish and Wildlife, then we continue working with the people we know, instead of feeling like, in addition to the agencies we work with in ag, we have to work with new ones. And for many, they care about agriculture, and if you come with that message from the ag side than from the conservation side, it was better assimilated. So they thought cooperation with the agencies they already work with would help. Some felt that working with their local associations, Cattlemen's Association, the sheriff, or the county commissioner's office, to streamline or manage the compensation program or the damage prevention agreements would be better for them, maybe because of the familiarity with the people that would increase their trust. And maybe it's a question of access, is the decisions are made over the county where I vote and not way over the mountains in Olympia. So they felt like having local management may improve their participation in these mitigation strategies. And many ranchers also like to hunt, but also many ranchers know that wolves will prefer to eat natural ungulates instead of cattle. Like Kevin has experienced on his ranch, he's got the ungulates, so the predators will eat those instead of, before they get to their livestock. So they thought, well, if you want wolves to be here, you have to ensure that there is enough ungulates for the wolves to feed on and for the sportsmen to hunt. That way there is less competition. And so it's like something that came up a lot from the interviews. So generally when I looked at the results and put them in this cloud, I usually expect that of all the themes, economics has to be the one that pops up. But the most theme that popped up was actually social and societal issues, where one of the biggest discussions that ranchers had to why they participate or why they won't participate. Economics indeed was there, it's fairly big, but the biggest one was like a lot of societal issues, which is, as a wildlife biologist, usually I may just focus on other things and not try to go into the people stuff and thinking about what other perceptions are, but seeing my result cloud pop up with societal issues was like, okay, so I guess that's the side that we have to, and we have to approach in order to try and speak about coexistence at all. So we have this pyramid, which is probably common in coexistence talks or disputes, where we have, when a conflict occurs, it's like the tip of the iceberg. There is so many other things which are happening below. So that conflict is just a dispute. The wolves eat livestock, you give them money, you're just addressing that. You find that all these societal issues are what even make this dispute worse, like the underlying conflict or the underlying issues where maybe people from, sometimes we have wildlife biologists who are out collaring wolves and they have the wolf information and they've been, been at the university with their master's degrees and they feel like they know all the information and what is the rancher telling me? So sometimes there is that conflict of that person thinks they're smarter than me, which is wrong, and so the person says, I will not work with that department because I encountered this one biologist who felt like they were better than me. So that can be an underlying conflict which can prevent, the rancher from even taking either compensation or from participating in any other sort of coexistence measures at all. And then like the identity would be like the deep-rooted conflicts, which is just feel like as a rancher, one of the things that came out actually was, as a rancher you have your property, and I know that because like you have rivers going through, these are part of the entire landscape, not just on your property, but on your land. Someone comes and tells you what to do with your water, and then they say, all right, you can't build this fence because there is this frog or there is this type of fish, and now there is wolves, and then the market for beef is also going down, and then you just feel like your very identity, your very lifestyle is under attack in every direction, and that causes you to have some sort of, like you're being threatened as a person, as a lifestyle, and that it brings up some deep-rooted conflict within. And so anyone else who comes to tell you something about let's conserve this plant or this new animal, you just feel like they are just contributing to that, attacking your identity and trying to remove you from existing at all. And those are things that are also shown, not necessarily biological, but that have to be addressed in order to ultimately solve conflicts or try to address the conflicts and then achieve coexistence at some point. Yeah, this is the same one, similar one, but I'll still go through it quickly. So, tangible costs are like the animal has been eaten and the tangible, then you pay them with money, but there is way more intangible costs that we just discussed here. And then, so then there is another thing which I found, some ranchers didn't like compensation, took too much time, was non-sufficient. And I read in some other countries where they have wolves, that they have what they call performance payments. And these, instead of paying you for what the wolves have killed, you kind of get compensated for how healthy your landscape is supporting the wolves. So it's up to you as the rancher, manage your ranch, like Kevin does. You get your crops out, you sell your animals, but then you're not shooting predators. And then you're taking good care of the land. The streams are healthy. So that means that you're going to be having way more biodiversity on your ranch that you're not losing because you're also taking care of your livestock. So the payment is for how much biodiversity you have. It's like a performance payment. And so that way you will automatically prevent killing the animal, the wildlife, because you get paid for them as opposed to waiting for them to kill your animal. So that's something that I also discuss about. Definitely discuss social dynamics that affect participation, like the identity issues we talked about, and finally collaboration with other agencies that they trust. So while this study was about ranchers and conflict, I know that it's important to understand perceptions of people who are directly affected by the natural resources that we so often try to manage, whether it's forests or streams and trying to preserve riverine habitats, trying to understand the perspectives of the people involved can increase our chances of soliciting their participation and ultimately getting positive behavior changes that we're usually looking for, even in making healthy lifestyle choices. Still, you have to understand the perceptions. Yep. So understanding barriers, motivations, and the values of the people who are directly involved with these wolves will be key in trying to solicit their participation in any mitigation strategies that we may be proposing to them. And that's all. Oh, there was an update since then. So the department hired more conflict specialists instead of in addition to the biologists they realized that they need some more people who are out to talk to the ranchers and hear more from their perspective. And I don't know the details of their job description, but I know that since 2015, the department has tried to make some efforts to get more into the social understanding of the wolf conflict instead of just the biological side of it. And the number had increased last year to about 60, the number of ranchers who had signed up to the damage prevention cooperative agreements. And then they also have what they call a Washington Wolf Group, which discusses wolf issues. And on this group, there is ranchers and hunters and different stakeholders to try and talk about wolves from all the directions and not just from biologists are studying wolves, ranchers are hating wolves, but more on a round table where everyone contributes. And last year I think, because there is many people in Washington who care for wolves, last year they passed a bill where I think the public can raise resources and then they can be used towards wolf mitigation. It's something which was new from last year, a bill where the public can contribute some of their resources. I mean, the public already does with taxes, but if you love wolves and you want to say department should get more money to do this, I think now it's possible through some sort of bill and organization in Washington. So that's all. Thank you so much for listening.